My name is Ethan Cole, and what I'm about to tell you started on a back road in the Texas Hill Country, near a small town that modern maps ignore, but truckers still call by its old name, Willow's Bend. The landscape repeats for miles, twisted oaks, white limestone, low-flow rivers, until the asphalt tires out and gives way to a dirt road that vanishes behind fences with no trespassing signs. It was there that I came across the well. The first version of the story reached me in a bar with no sign, smelling of oil and sawdust. A man with mechanic's hands said that the Talbot farm hid, behind a dead orchard, an old hole that the family had cemented twice, unsuccessfully. He said that at night, when the wind whistled just right, the ground would spit snakeskins like confetti. They laughed. He didn't. He said, "If you look closely, you'll see the scales have tooth marks, I work with documenting forgotten historical structures, wooden bridges, stone cisterns, old water tanks, and the right phone call came the following week. Talbot property, 1898, well, needs recording for a donation and restoration request. The email had a legal dry tone, but attached were 3 poorly framed photos. In 2, the stone circle covered by a welded iron plate, with old chains still in place. In the 3rd, something that seemed banal, dirt around with overturned grass, but with a detail the body recognizes before the mind. A dull, rounded shine in the lower corner, as if something wet had dragged and left a polish that didn't belong to that type of soil. It was too small for a cow, too large for an ordinary snake. I arrived one September morning, with the heat already raising waves on the horizon, and a dust smell cracking my lips. The Talbot house was a palimpsest of generations. Closed verandas, boards replaced in the 70s, patched mosquito screens. The person who received me was the granddaughter of the last Talbot to live there, June Talbot, a middle-aged woman with the demeanor of someone who learned how to take inventory of losses. Something big and patient. She didn't shake my hand. She showed me the way with her chin. Just document it. Don't touch it. On the way, she explained as much as she wanted. The well served the whole region in the early 20th century. The water became scarce, then murky, then bad. In 1954, a man fell in and never came up. In 1955, they came with concrete. It gave relief for a few years. Then the sound leaked again. At that sound, her voice faltered, crawling. The well, when it appeared, wasn't what I expected. No adornment. The stones were rough, dry, well-fitted, with the upper circle consolidated by a thick cement collar. Above it, a welded iron lid, 2 rings removed in the past, and a language of scratches that rust had almost eaten away. Old lever marks, fresh crowbar marks. I pressed my palm to the metal, warm, although it was in the shade, too inward. In corners of the world where snakes are just snakes, scales don't return from the depths to the edge with this kind of mark. The sound the metal returned was of a hollow box with closely placed walls. The edge had a cord of salt scattered randomly, and between the grains, something that looked like broken straw. I kneeled. They were scales, dry, dull, some with fine parallel scars as if scraped against hard stone, limestone, and more strangely, small rounded marks, 2 by 2, spaced like the length of a phalanx, as if regular pressure from teeth. I brought a contact stethoscope, a tool borrowed from an engineer, and pressed it against the lid. June was 2 steps away, arms crossed, as if reciting to herself the prayer, "Don't insist." The metal returned silence for long seconds. Then, a sound just above the threshold of error. A dull drag, not of sand, not of water. Something heavy adjusting against stone, coming from below. A long pause, and then a single dry tap, as if 2 different surfaces were getting acquainted by touch. Iron recognizing leather. The stethoscope vibrated in my ear. The sound came with a breath so light it could have been my own imagination, till the dust on the lid trembled, drawing circles like in a poor resonating box. June said, "Enough," but not with authority, with pleading. We walked around. The dead orchard served as a cathedral for miniature vultures, grackles and starlings that learned to love ruins. On the ground, interrupted trails, dragging lines with curves that resembled the letters children trace before writing. I found, 3 meters from the edge of the well, a circle of compacted soil, with 2 shallow, opposite depressions that were neither footprints nor hoofprints. To the touch, just a polish. Around the circle's edges, small bubbles of broken soil, as if something had inflated from below and then collapsed again. Texas has caves and invisible sinkholes. Limestone is a cheese full of veins. I learned to avoid stories, but this one made the map enter my body. The well was just a mouth, there was a throat, and what lived there used other exits. June told me without looking at me that when she was a child she heard the lid bang from inside. Once, twice. Her grandfather said it was the old woods responding to temperature variation. But when the wind came from the south at night, the house would smell of stagnant water and wet leather. Then things started appearing at the edge, pieces of deer bone, a corral float, a belt with leather bitten in regular semicircles. The family welded the lid twice. In the summer of 1999, the cows disappeared without a sound. "It's not a wolf when the grass doesn't move," she said. "It's not a coyote when the fence didn't even creak." Her voice broke on the not. I took measurements, photos, temperatures. The sun became a blade and the shadow bent the barn's boards. At some point, the sound of a tractor in the distance ceased. In flat fields, silence moves fast. I pressed the stethoscope against the lid again. This time the metal returned a sound I couldn't confuse with anything human. A slow roll, leather scraping stone, followed by a muffled impact, not strong, and then a breath that made the dust dance in a radial pattern, as if a large lung were testing its volume. My hand sweated and the stethoscope slipped. The air for a second came warm from the tiny gap between metal and cement. The smell of old water, damp limestone. And another note, bittersweet, that I recognized from childhood in sheds. A dead rat. Not the whole creature, its trail as it dried. "We're leaving for today," June said, with the contained urgency of someone who doesn't want to break a pact with the land itself. I asked why not call someone. University, wildlife control, sheriff. She laughed without laughing. "We've been calling men our whole lives. They put up fences, iron pipes. The thing learns the iron, the fences and the pipes. Then it comes back. Only better." When she turned her back, I saw a scar on her ankle, a circle with a crescent bite. I didn't ask. I returned to the roadside motel in Johnson City with the dust stuck to my tongue. That night, the air conditioner failed twice and the curtains blew in, as if the room were breathing with me. 3 dry knocks on the bathroom pipes made my body sit before my mind understood. 2 knocks, a pause, a third, as if someone were responding to the pattern I had unknowingly learned at the well. The phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number with no text, just a grainy photo of the iron lid, with a halo of lighter dust around it, and a curved line made with something wet, drawing an imperfect S on the cement's edge. The caption, automatic, marked "Captured by Trail Camera 02.13. I hadn't installed any camera. In the morning, June was waiting for me at the gate with a short man, wearing a crumpled felt hat, old boots, and eyes like a deep river. "This is Roy Hargreaves," she said. "He knows the underground better than any map." The man didn't shake my hand. "What's down there isn't just a creature," he said, looking over my shoulder toward the house. "It's an old path. A limestone well becomes a water knot. A snake likes knots. People do too. When we squeeze a knot with iron, it doesn't untie. It learns to be another knot." And then he told as if praying, "In 1937, they lowered a boy with a rope to retrieve a can that fell. Something else came up the rope. It was the last bucket of water from that well. I asked what something else meant. He only said, 'Scales don't rise alone. Teeth don't leave marks from the inside without a big mouth. And a big mouth in a hole learns to breathe stone.' I asked for one more day. I would bring a directional microphone, simple sensors, chalk to mark the soil, a camera for the orchard." June looked at Roy. Roy looked at the sky, as if asking for a safety net for those who insist on falling. "One day, come back before sunset." I agreed. But the truth is that time had already entered the well, and my chest. What lives in us doesn't respect clocks, and as we would find out, neither does the well. I returned before 8, with the sun still low and the limestone exhaling that sweet chill that only Texas holds in the early hours, bringing along a directional microphone, 2 homemade vibration sensors, and blue chalk to mark the ground around the iron lid, while Roy Hargreaves walked ahead without looking back, as if following a trail that needs no eye. only bone and memory. June was waiting with a bundle of keys, but not to open. To show she would keep everything closed, speaking little, with her arms crossed and an ancient fear that seemed to fit perfectly into her skin, as old as the date when the well was first cemented in the years of severe drought and broken promises. I drew 3 perpendicular chalk lines across the lid, like clamps around a wound, and circled the spots where the soil showed signs of polish, that dull shine of something that had rubbed the same spot many times, like a passageway for a heavy body, not hooves or tires. Roy pointed out 2 shallow opposite depressions in the dirt ring. Anchors, he said without poetry, as if naming a tool, and explained that in perforated limestone rock, everything becomes a vein. An animal that learns a vein becomes a ruler of patience, and patience builds a home where a man only sees a hole. I pressed the microphone against the seam of iron and cement and left the vibration sensor stuck to the stone ring, while June, 2 steps away, repeated to herself, "Just one day." And the wind brought the scent of warm dust, stored leather, and something bittersweet that reminded me of a small creature rotting in the distance, without any flies nearby. At 8:47, the first event, a slow brushing, leather on stone rising from below, followed by a breath that made the dust on the lid tremble in concentric circles, a perfect design like a cheap resonance box, and in the wake of the breath, a short metallic note, as if a tooth had tasted iron and given up. "Listen to the interval," Roy said, with his hand open over the iron without touching it. "It's not wind, it's a long lung." And the sensor drew a clean, low wave that hit the phone screen like a heartbeat multiplied by stone, while the microphone recorded a moist click at the end of each cycle, not water dripping, but a tongue recoiling. I marked the erased lines in chalk, the one on the left scratched by a diagonal line, the middle one eaten in an arc, and the one on the right untouched, as if the mass below were bending through vectors, using the soil ring as support to turn the body inside the throat. June spoke of the summer of 1999 without looking at me. The cows disappeared without noise, without a broken fence, without flattened grass, as if they had evaporated through the earth's navel, and only much later did things start to appear at the edge. Thick scales, thin bones, leather bitten with regular semicircles, returns from what the depths didn't want to keep. "They called a man with a truck and a chain," she said. "The iron cracked twice and the ground only returned dust. And that's when they welded it again, promised prayers, and accepted the silence that breathes, because in certain places, silence is surviving one more month." At 10:02, the lid sang low. Not the sound of free metal, but of something alive touching the structure from within, and the microphone exploded in a short peak that made my shoulder want to run while my legs stayed still. And along with the peak, a warm breath rose carrying 3 smells like beads on a thread: old water, living limestone, and cheap talcum mixed with floral perfume. June closed her eyes, and it was Roy who said, "People pass nearby late at night," pointing to the fence with new wire. "Curious doesn't respect warning." And this human thread tied to the well's breath was proof that the water knot touched the road knot, and everything that touches exchanges things: smell, pieces, memory. We installed a trail camera in the dead orchard, facing the stone circle with no flash, and marked the time while the starlings perched on dry branches like black notes on a cracked staff, and the light turned the dust into poor gold. At noon, the distant tractor fell silent and the entire field seemed to hold its breath. The lid responded with a sigh, the dust formed a discreet rose, and something tapped from below. A touch, a pause, another touch, a longer pause, a third touch. The same rhythm that had found me at the motel, responding silently to a question no one had asked aloud. Roy pulled from his pocket a piece of leather with a number engraved, dried by decades. "I took this out in '78, he said. "It was from a bucket strap. It came down whole, came up food from inside." And he raised his eyes as if checking the sky before crossing a deep river, asking June not to stand too close to the edge when the wind turned from the south. I took measurements, redrew the chalk lines, photographed the dull scales with parallel scars, memories of stone and iron, and recorded another 5 minutes of the deep rubbing, a liturgy of muscle against limestone that slowly taught the alphabet of the whole. The turn came at 2:11 p.m., with a cloud closing the sun and the air pressure dropping a notch. The sensor drew a vertical tooth, the lid emitted a longer sigh, and through an invisible crack, a thread of dust rose, swirled, and landed on my wrist, warm, as if the breath down below had learned my pulse through the metal. It was at this hour that the orchard camera clicked on its own. No wind, no visible creature, and the display showed, seconds later, a damp curve drawn on the edge of the cement, a crooked S, as if a tongue had swept the ring from the inside and left a signature where the eye could reach. "Close for today," June said, her voice cut, and Roy nodded slowly, reminding that in limestone every shortcut returns to being a path when water insists, and that what rises from an old well learns to exit through other mouths, sometimes where we drink, sometimes where we sleep. We collected the sensor and microphone, left the camera, and the three of us walked back through the grass corridor, the sun already filtering through the clouds like a blind blade, and the well behind, breathing through the lid with the patience of one who counts not days, but epochs. At the motel, the air conditioner finally cooled, but the curtains again put on their play of lungs, gently entering and exiting, in cycles that weren't mine. And the bathroom pipe returned 2 short knocks, a pause, a third, until the phone vibrated with another anonymous photo. The lid seen from above, the halo of lighter dust, and a new, smaller scratch repeating the curve, like a child practicing a letter. The automatic caption marked 2 on 12, and in the corner, a blurred moth looked like an old eye watching. I slept little, with my body trying to learn the right silence so as not to respond when called by the number of knocks the field knows and the city forgets. I returned with Roy before the sun, when the limestone still held the cold and the field seemed to hold its breath, and I found June at the gate with the same key that opens nothing. It only ensures that no one, not even her, succumbs to the wrong urge to lift the lid. The air carried the scent of wet dust even though it hadn't rained, and a faint note of stored leather, the kind that lingers in an old barn. The trail camera in the orchard had captured 5 shots during the night. On the display, dark stains, halos of dust, a damp curve like poorly made writing on cement. It was the S again, but in 3 different sizes, as if practicing. I installed a second vibration sensor on the stone ring, this time aligned with the anchors, the shallow depressions Roy had pointed out the day before, and redid the chalk marks, now in 6 crossed lines, like a sutured scar around the lid. Roy brought an old mechanic's stethoscope and pressed it against the iron, silent with his eyes half closed, as if listening to water thinking. "Today it'll lift the body and lower the head," he said, with a certainty that required no proof. June stood apart, arms crossed, quietly repeating just one day, as if flattening time with her own voice. At 8:19 the sensors sang together, a clean low wave, followed by a hive of fine serrations, and then the sigh, the dust trembling on the lid in concentric circles, as if the iron were a drum membrane. The microphone picked up at the end of the cycle, the moist click, the tongue recoiling, and in the middle something we hadn't heard yet, a grainy brushing, stone ground by leather, as if the creature, upon turning, carried limestone under its scales. The air that emerged from the micro cracks came warm, with 3 smells in the same line: old water, living limestone, and cheap talc. The human presence was in the well's breath like an involuntary signature. Roy told me to look at the ground, not the lid. The chalk lines started to lose pieces at oblique angles, and the circle I had marked around an old polish sank a centimeter, so slowly it seemed like an illusion. "Anchor," he said, pointing with his chin. "It bends the body here, pushes there." The well was just the mouth of a large knot. The rest of the knot twisted under the orchard, between invisible veins. June told without looking at us that the family had heard this movement beneath the house twice, once in 1978, again in 1999, as if a huge sofa slid across a room without anyone pushing it. Since then, no one sleeps in the upstairs room. At 9:03, the iron responded with a sound that wasn't impact. It was a tension. 3 tiny taps, metal, from inside out, in the rhythm we already knew. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The field became indecently silent. The starlings changed branches like people switching pews in a church. The microphone exploded in a peak, and at the same time the orchard camera fired twice, showing only dust scratched by a curve. The same letter, now cutting the cement edge from the inside like a signature on glass. "Don't respond," Roy said, without looking at me, and I felt my body obey before I understood the command. We decided to move away. Roy guided me to a dry ditch 20 paces from the well, where the limestone formed a low triangular mouth swallowed by mesquite roots. "Old throat," he whispered. "Cold comes from here." The lantern showed curved slime inside, a flow arrow and greasy marks shining on the stones, polished by decades of passage. In the corner, a small pile of returns, thick scales, rat bones, a bent carabiner, and half of a red lighter with small bite marks, 2 by 2, regular. June didn't touch. Roy placed everything back. "Animal altar doesn't move," he said, and the phrase stayed in my ears like rural doctrine. We returned to the lid just in time to see the dust form a large rose, like a breath losing its rhythm. The upper sensor drew a perfect vertical tooth, an energy spike, and through an invisible crack, a warmer breath touched our faces. The smell had changed. In addition to water and talc, there came a familiar bittersweet note, hot rubber. "Tire," I whispered. Roy pointed to the fence, where fresh half-sole marks zigzagged back and forth. The curiosity had been recent. The well knows how to hold onto what touches it. June led us to the barn. On a shelf she kept like one keeps a saint, a cheap relic the well spat out in 1999, with a crooked R carved into it. Beside it, a strip of leather with regular bite marks and a railroad time card, its numbers faded by moisture. "The earth returns what it doesn't want," she said. "Not everything we lose is worth keeping." We photographed, noted, and returned everything to the same spot. No object wanted to be a keepsake for our home. At noon, the distant tractor fell silent, that round silence of the flat field, and the lid responded like a drum membrane struck from within. The dust danced in perfect circles, and something heavy brushed the iron from below, not trying to open it, just checking the thickness, the texture, the temperature, like a hand recognizing a door in the dark. The microphone captured a continuous vibration, a deep hum, and then the tongue click that closed each cycle. The body below was training our presence as a simple physics problem: weight, support, traction. Roy asked that we move farther away. "When the pressure changes, it looks for another mouth," he said, pointing to the dry ditch. We crouched between the roots, and for a long minute, we heard the earth creaking lightly, grain against grain. The cold air coming from the old throat became less cold, then warm. The lantern trembled in my wrist. The shadow of a broad back passed slowly in the background and disappeared as if the stone drank it. Here it wasn't theater, it was logistics. The thing shifted veins to adjust its body to the day's heat. We returned to finish. Before collecting the sensor, the well spoke with a clarity that science calls an anomaly, and the field calls a warning. 3 dry, certain taps, with a pause, exactly the length of learning. Roy kept his eyes on the iron. June, pale, said only, "Enough." The chalk lines had been eaten at 4 points, the circles sunk half a centimeter, and on the cement edge, the letter repeated, again, S, as if the depths had learned to write with its tongue in our alphabet. At the motel, the orchard camera sent by itself at 2:11 another photo. The lid seen from above, a clear dust halo, and the smaller curve, like a practiced scribble. The air conditioner hissed twice and died. The curtains performed the gesture of lungs. From the bathroom, 2 knocks, a pause, the third, the rhythm. "Don't respond," I read in the history. Roy's message with no time or date. I held my breath until it hurt. I slept in intervals that weren't mine. I arrived before dawn, when the limestone breathes cold, and the entire field feels like a chest caught between inhalation and exhalation, and I found Roy at the gate with his wrinkled hat and the ready phrase that leaves no room for discussion. "Today the tide turns early." June followed behind with the key that opens nothing, her arms crossed, and the same promise to herself, just one day. The orchard camera blinked an indecent number of shots. On the screen, halos of dust, the circle of the lid like an iris, and the curved line, the S, repeated in different sizes, like a child practicing stubbornness. We reinstalled the sensor on the stone ring, aligned with the anchors, redid the 6 lines of chalk like sutures, and left the microphone biting the seam of iron and cement, while the place's breath imposed itself. Long cycles, moist clicks at the end, dust trembling in concentric circles on the lid. At 8:07, the first clean peak came, a low round wave, scratching the display like a heart multiplied by stone, and soon after, the brushing of leather-grinding limestone, granular, followed by the warm breath with 3 notes of scent. Old water, living limestone, and cheap talc. The human breath hanging in the well's exhale seemed sharper, more recent, like perfume pressed onto a page. Roy placed his open hand in the air above the lid without touching. "It's closer to the iron than yesterday," he said, and the chalk lines began to eat away at fine obliques, as if invisible fingers were testing the purity of the outline. June, pale, asked us to go to the dry ditch, the old throat swallowed by mesquite roots, and we obeyed, as if switching seats in church when the priest changes tone. Down below, the air that had been cold the night before now came out neutral, then warm in pulses, and the lantern drew new marks of grease on the stone, shining like oil trails on a large machine. At 8:41, we heard beneath the earth a simple gesture I never forgot. A body shifting. It wasn't an attack, it wasn't a leap. It was the dragging of tons, changing veins, like a huge sofa sliding across a room without a hand pushing. The sensor sang a vertical tooth, the microphone burst into a short peak, and the well lid far off responded with 3 dry taps, the learned rhythm, tap, tap, so accurate that the body, on its own, wanted to respond. "Don't respond," Roy said, and the order was less of a warning and more of a dogma to keep living. "She's marking time." We returned to the stone circle. The iron was sweating. The dust drew perfect roses with every long exhalation, and the scent gained a 4th note, bitter, that I recognized without pride. Hot rubber. The fence, 10 meters away, had new half-sole marks zigzagging. Recent curiosity. The well learns what touches it. On the cement ring, a damp curve began to form from inside out, as if a tongue were testing the edge to write. Roy lowered his eyes. That's when we heard footsteps. Not from the field, not from the house, from the other side of the fence. A thin figure, cheap cap, shoes with zigzag soles, phone in hand. "Hey, don't worry, I'm just filming." A voice of someone collecting views. June shouted stop without moving from her spot. The boy, no older than 20, raised the phone above the lid, searching for a borrowed angle of courage. The well sighed beneath him with such a clear pulse that the dust drew a perfect circle under the lens. "Step back," Roy said quietly, and the boy laughed, a sound that didn't know the place. The microphone exploded in a double peak. The sensor drew 2 teeth close together. The lid sank a centimeter, imperceptible to the naked eye, palpable to anyone whose body had already been taken by that alphabet. "Back!" June shouted, now running. The boy took a crooked step back, stumbled on his own shoe, hit his knee on the stone ring, and instinctively placed his palm on the lid to avoid falling. The hand made a clean circle in the dust. The iron responded with a dry touch from below. Recognition. There was no blast, no movie scene. It was the opposite. Compressed silence and an almost small gesture, the lid raising a finger on each side as if the well were breathing through its mouth, and the boy's hand sinking half a centimeter into the dust before letting go. He fell backward, sitting, laughing nervously, filming himself by reflex. "Did you see that?" he said, not understanding that he had already been noticed by the one who decides the place's tally. The breath that rose was warm and sweet in a way that felt indecent, with talc and skin. "Out," Roy said to him, the word cutting the air like a knife. June escorted him to the gate without touching, like one escorts a shadow. When we returned to the lid, the dust held perfectly the mark of his palm, and beside it, the curved line, the S, small, new, repeated. The microphone, still recording, caught the moist click of the tongue and the grainy brushing of limestone ground by leather. The sensor dropped an octave. "She lowered to the throat," Roy said, and the entire field seemed to release its breath at once. We descended to the dry ditch. The air now came out hot, enough to make the lantern breathe vapor. The shadow of a broad back passed once, twice, slow, not as one who flees, but as one who calculates. In the corner, the returns gained an indecent item, a cheap ring with a fake stone, bent, freshly spat out, still wet from the depth's exhale. June didn't touch. Roy collected it with a handkerchief, showed it and returned it where he found it. "Report and return," he repeated, The rule that keeps the stubborn alive. At 10:03, the tide truly turned. The distant tractor fell silent. The field held its breath. The lid sang like a membrane struck from within, and for a moment stretched until it hurt. The dust drew a large, perfect rose, then another, smaller, 2 lungs breathing out of sync, and the rhythm of taps returned, tap, tap, pause, tap. The body wanted to respond with a finger on the edge. I didn't respond. I held my hand in my pocket until it hurt. We finished. I collected the sensor and microphone, photographed the chalk lines eaten at 4 points, the circles sunken, the perfect palm, and the new, small S. The orchard camera stored the last shots. At the gate, June, with the voice of one ending a mass, said, "The farm will close the area, no visits, no donations, no restorations. The report stays in the drawer." Roy only nodded, his eyes fixed on the invisible line that connects the lid to the veins beneath the orchard. "The well isn't a keepsake. It's a passage," he said. At night at the motel, the air conditioner died again. The curtains performed the gesture of lungs, entering and exiting in cycles that were no longer mine. From the bathroom, 2 knocks, a pause, the third. The phone vibrated with one last anonymous photo. The lid seen from above, the clear halo, and 3 curved lines, SS in different sizes, as if someone were practicing a signature to use outside. The body learned to stay silent at the right moment. I swallowed the urge to respond with a knock on the tiles. If this story has a moral, it is the opposite of courage. It is obedience to what breathes stone. Sealing lids doesn't end wells when they live in limestone. It only teaches other mouths. The thing we found there wasn't just a creature. It was a method, anchor, support, passage. It entered and exited through where Texas sings underground, marking with its tongue our alphabet until it learned to call us by the name of dust. We investigated, we regretted, and we learned the rule that keeps the stubborn whole: report and return. Don't respond, don't bring hunger. The rest, the well solves.